The name Fonda radiates Hollywood glamour, but behind the trophies and red carpet smiles lies a saga riddled with secrets, heartbreak, and deep personal battles. How did this celebrated dynasty become a symbol of both cinematic brilliance and private turmoil? And why do so many people still whisper about the family's darkest chapters? Let's unravel the hidden reality behind the Fonda legacy, one marked by ambition, tragedy, and the fierce fight to stay true to one's principles. Henry's haunting childhood. Long before he stood in front of cameras as the stoic hero in classic films, Henry Fonda experienced an event that permanently reshaped his worldview. At 14 years old, he witnessed something no child should ever see: the lynching of a black man, Will Brown, in Omaha. The sight would sear itself into his memory. While many know Henry for his calm gravitas on screen, few realize his commitment to justice was rooted in this traumatic moment. Growing up in a liberal-leaning family in the American heartland, Henry's father wanted him to see the world for what it truly was, no matter how painful. This exposure to brutality sparked Henry's lifelong distaste for violence. It also shaped the roles he chose later, favoring scripts that tackled social injustice. Whether playing the everyman in The Grapes of Wrath or standing up for principle in 12 Angry Men, Henry brought an authenticity that could only come from firsthand experience of how cruel people could be to one another. That early trauma, however, was rarely discussed within the family. Publicly, Henry presented himself as calm, measured, and often unshakable. Privately, he didn't like to show vulnerability. He had witnessed something horrifying, and burying his pain became second nature. It was as if Henry felt any display of turmoil would only give darkness more power. This tendency to seal off his emotions would echo throughout his family life, laying the groundwork for the Fonda's complicated and often painful home environment. A family torn apart. In the public eye, Henry Fonda seemed like the embodiment of a reliable, heroic father figure. But behind the scenes, he and his wife, Frances Ford Seymour, were contending with immense pressure. Frances was a Canadian socialite with ties to aristocracy, and she entered the marriage with her own emotional scars and a daughter from a previous relationship. Despite a background of privilege, Frances wrestled with severe mental health issues that grew worse over time. At first, Henry tried to keep the family afloat. He balanced a career, took on iconic roles, and strove to maintain the illusion of normalcy. Yet the pressures of his professional life and his own emotional distance put a strain on Frances's already fragile mind. Trapped in a life that demanded perfection, she felt isolated, especially when Henry decided the marriage had run its course. He wanted a divorce and intended to marry a woman 23 years younger. The final blow came on Frances's 42nd birthday. Feeling she had no other escape, she chose to end her own life while staying at a psychiatric institution. For her children, Jane and Peter, the devastation was twofold. They lost a mother at an age when they desperately needed nurturing, and they lost her under a shroud of secrecy. The official story at the time was that she succumbed to a medical condition, but the truth would eventually come out in the most heartbreaking way imaginable, through the pages of a gossip magazine. While the press quickly moved on to other Hollywood scandals, the impact on the Fonda household was profound. Jane, just 12 years old, and Peter, only 10, were left to grapple with the aftermath in a home devoid of emotional warmth, setting the stage for deep insecurities and bitterness that would resonate for decades. An unforgiving father figure. In the wake of Frances's passing, Henry Fonda's already distant demeanor grew colder. Jane and Peter rarely saw the tender side of their father. If he ever felt grief or guilt for what had transpired, he kept it buried. At the dinner table, conversation was minimal. The tension was anything but. Henry's children recall feeling constantly judged, as though each bite of food or each word out of their mouths might invite criticism. In truth, Henry himself grew up in a strict Christian Science household. Crime was frowned upon, and you were expected to pray away your pain rather than discuss it openly. He seemed to carry that philosophy into fatherhood, leaving Jane and Peter uncertain of how to express their deepest fears or sadness. This, combined with the abrupt introduction of stepmothers, created a home environment so stifling that the two siblings clung to each other or pushed back in open rebellion. Jane often described her father as impossible to please. His approval was the elusive prize she chased but never felt she fully earned. Peter, too, absorbed the brunt of that chilly atmosphere. Both siblings would spend a large part of their adult lives deciphering Henry's distant parenting style, often concluding that he was simply unable or unwilling to show the vulnerability that might have brought them closer. A harsh memory still etched in Peter's mind involves a simple act of childish curiosity. He once took a piece of candy from Henry's dressing room. The punishment was swift and severe. In Peter's recollection, Henry kicked down a locked bathroom door to administer a spanking he'd never forget. Encounters like these taught the children that stepping out of line would yield frightening consequences. For a boy who'd already lost his mother under tragic circumstances, it was a lesson in survival. Never show weakness, never ask too many questions, and never cross the line. Peter's rebellious path. Shaken by his mother's tragic passing and worn down by Henry's strictness, Peter Fonda craved freedom from the confines of his father's expectations. While Henry's Hollywood persona was typically the honorable, upright figure on screen, Peter was determined to break that mold. By the 1960s, the country was rife with social upheaval, and Peter found his niche in the counterculture movement. He grew his hair long, mingled with artists, and indulged in the era's spirit of rebellion. Acting opportunities came, but so did controversy. A few film studios refused to hire him, wary of his outspoken nature and rumored drug use. He was even arrested for marijuana possession in 1966, an event that only stoked his rebellious image. Soon, Peter discovered that the lines between fiction and reality blurred when he starred in Easy Rider, the cinematic anthem of a generation demanding change. As a freedom-loving biker riding across America, he embodied the very defiance Henry's fans would never have expected from a Fonda. In Peter's view, this wasn't just a role, but a statement of independence, an on-screen demonstration that he wouldn't be tethered to the well-polished legacy of his father. Despite the adrenaline and creative fulfillment that came with his newfound identity, Peter carried a lingering emotional weight. Years later, he opened up about suffering from post-traumatic stress, tracing it back to the heartbreak of his mother's death and the harsh discipline he experienced as a child. Haunted by nightmares, he realized too late that the silent wounds of his youth were fueling his need to break every boundary. On the surface, he was the freewheeling Hollywood rebel, but inside, the shadows of the Fonda name and family secrets continued to follow him. Jane's personal battles. Jane Fonda took a different path from her brother, though she faced her own traumas. From a young age, she felt her value hinged on appearance, an idea she traced back to her father's subtle yet damaging comments. If she wasn't perfect or perfectly beautiful, she might not be loved. This pervasive fear seeped into her adulthood, manifesting in severe body image struggles and a bout with an eating disorder that lasted well into her 30s. In her teens, Jane grappled with an unsettling secret. She and Peter had been told a dishonest story about their mother's final days. It wasn't until a year later that Jane learned from a gossip publication that Frances had chosen to end her life. The revelation left her feeling ashamed, angry, and immensely guilty. She recalled refusing to see her mother during a final visit simply because she didn't know the full extent of Frances's mental illness. That memory would weigh heavily on her conscience for decades. As she grew older, Jane endured further betrayals. She later revealed instances of being exploited in work settings by powerful individuals, as well as experiences of childhood molestation. Eager for approval and still battling her own insecurities, she often found it nearly impossible to say no. Yet, despite these hardships, Jane discovered a sense of purpose that gave her a reason to stand tall. Slowly, she embraced activism, channeling her empathy into social causes. Her father's portrayal of righteous men in films like 12 Angry Men and The Grapes of Wrath had clearly influenced her. If she couldn't earn Henry's affection through perfection, perhaps she could honor his ideals by fighting for what was right in the world. Jane's activism soon soared beyond simple humanitarian work. The Vietnam War had divided the nation, and she made the bold choice to voice her disapproval. This wasn't merely a passing protest. She went so far as to tour North Vietnam, urging an end to the conflict. The move caused a national uproar, especially among veterans who felt her actions bordered on betrayal. One photograph became the emblem of this entire controversy, Jane seated on an anti-aircraft gun in Hanoi. To her detractors, it was unforgivable. Some labeled her a traitor, demanded she be prosecuted, and carried a grudge that remains visible even in modern-day protests. Others argued that her actions, while radical, were in line with the fervent anti-war climate among younger generations. What Jane didn't initially realize was that the U.S. government itself was paying very close attention. The FBI and CIA monitored her every move, while the NSA tapped her phone calls. They hoped to catch her in a criminal act or uncover evidence that might undermine her influence. Jane, though rattled, maintained her stance, insisting that the war needed to end, no matter how unpopular her methods. Over the years, she repeatedly apologized for the infamous photo, stating she never intended to insult American soldiers. Yet the nickname Hanoi Jane clung to her, overshadowing even her most accomplished acting roles for a significant portion of her career. Many Americans either admired or despised her, but few felt neutral. The controversy brought her more media attention than any movie could have done, solidifying her status as one of Hollywood's most provocative figures. Reconciliation and regret. For all the hurt that lingered between Henry and his children, time eventually presented moments of healing. Peter and Jane learned more about their father's internal struggles as he aged. It wasn't easy for him to communicate love in a straightforward manner, and his taciturn nature had likely been reinforced by witnessing cruelty as a young teen. In the final chapters of Henry's life, he slowly found his way back to his children. Working together on projects like On Golden Pond, which earned Henry his long-awaited Best Actor Oscar, became a conduit for reconnecting. In that film, life appeared to mirror art. Henry and Jane played father and daughter, navigating unspoken wounds. Off-screen, they fought through the layers of unresolved pain, each trying to finally see the other's perspective. Jane would later credit her father's on-screen roles for fueling her drive to tackle injustice. If Henry had not starred in 12 Angry Men or The Grapes of Wrath, she might never have developed the courage to stand against what she saw as wrongdoing, both in her own life and on the global stage. Though they seldom discuss these parallels directly, their shared legacy in activism and filmmaking bridged a gap that once felt insurmountable. Peter, too, was able to make peace with the stern patriarch he once feared. In many interviews, he described an evolution from anger and confusion to acceptance. He eventually recognized that Henry's flaws were part of a generational cycle, strict parenting styles, suppressed emotions, and a refusal to talk openly about trauma. While Peter's rebellious spirit never faded, he learned to appreciate the complexities in his father's life, finding their own voices. By the time Henry passed away, Jane and Peter had developed reputations all their own. Jane became a two-time Oscar winner, a fitness mogul, and a lightning rod for social controversy. Peter carved out his space in Hollywood's counterculture niche, receiving an Oscar nomination for co-writing Easy Rider and later starring in numerous independent projects. The siblings found solace in each other. Their shared childhood heartbreak and their father's stoicism became a foundation of mutual understanding. During interviews, each has spoken of the other with deep respect, acknowledging that they lived through the same emotional tumult but emerged with different perspectives. For Jane, activism transformed over time into a broader concern for environmental causes. She continually faced arrests, even in recent years, for standing up against policies she believed would harm the planet. Some observers saw echoes of her Vietnam-era protests, updated for a new generation of social issues. This time, though, she was far more conscious of public perception, avoiding any accidental symbolism that might overshadow her message. Peter, on the other hand, took on a quieter role, lending his name and energy to political causes he believed in, though never again sparking a media firestorm like Jane's. In the aftermath of so many personal challenges, he seemed to find a more balanced approach, still rebellious but tempered by age and reflection. The persistent memory of losing a mother at such a young age, combined with the complexities of a father he could never fully comprehend, motivated him to value family bonds as an adult. Looking back, the Fonda family story is far more than a Hollywood tale of glamour and golden trophies. It's a testament to how deeply personal pain can hide behind polished veneers, and how those early wounds can reverberate for decades. Henry's traumatizing childhood ignited a passion for justice, yet it also fueled an emotional distance that scarred his own children. Francis's fragile mind crumbled under the weight of societal and marital pressures, leaving Jane and Peter to grapple with the haunting aftermath of her final decision. All the while, Jane and Peter, desperate for their father's approval, or maybe just for a sense of family closeness, found separate paths that sometimes ran parallel, sometimes collided, yet always led them back to the same question. Could the Fondas ever fully heal from the secrets that bound them together? In some respects, they did. They formed new family bonds, championed social causes, and faced the public with a mix of defiance and candor. But in other ways, the legacy of shame, guilt, and regret remains woven into their story. Even so, their struggles have become part of their strength. Henry's pursuit of truth in cinema shaped Jane's activism, Peter's quest for freedom, and ultimately an entire generation's understanding of what it means to stand up for one's beliefs. If there's one takeaway from the Fonda family's many ups and downs, it might be this. Sometimes the greatest roles in life are performed off screen, away from the scripts, where individuals must face their darkest truths to find a way forward.